Everyone knows the iPhone changed the world, whether you wanted to video chat with a friend across the world or just look at cat videos on your way to work. The iPhone changed our way of interacting with the world. As it turns out, it also changed the world of usability benchmarking. The iPhone revealed an unmet need. So, Inge De Bleecker co-created the USERindex. The letters stand for
usefulness, satisfaction, ease of use, and reliability. So those are the 4 dimensions that we measure in the user index. And that does give a bit more of a comprehensive overview of sort of what today, I guess, we define as the user's experience. With the iPhone, it wasn't just anymore about ease of use and learnability, but now it was about delight. It was just about that satisfaction, and it just became about more. And so measuring a user experience just became something that we felt needed more dimensions.
The open source USERindex poses 10 naturally worded questions to users to gauge their experiences with a digital interface.
We did a number of experiments, just trying to fine-tune the statements and the way we sort of calculate the scores, and then also what those scores means, because again, what does a 3.9 mean versus a 4.2? So we have a nice scale all the way from green to red with orange in the middle that kind of helps give an understanding of where you truly sit. In addition, of course, we have the historical data, which by now is quite significant from 8 years worth of studies that also help companies understand where they sit within their industry in terms of their score. We also use it for inclusive experiences. We've tested it out, and anything from websites to mobile apps to conversational experiences. So it's quite versatile as a high-level benchmark.
And the most rewarding part for Inga is hearing secondhand how it is helping brands all over the world.
It's a little bit hard for us to know. We do definitely get emails from either people who are interested or people say, oh yeah, I've been using the user index and it's really been working out well. A consultant at Porsche came to us, this is about 2 years ago, and he said, I'm evaluating a benchmarking score for Porsche, and I looked at a number of different ones, and your score, the statements, they really hit the values that brand is going for. And because of that, I've recommended your score. And so that really kind of hit something where it's like, okay, yes, these statements are relevant to the user experience. So relevant, they're relevant to the brands themselves.
This is the Ready Test Go podcast brought to you by Applause. I'm David Carty. Today's guest is UX expert Inge De Bleecker. Inge is a UX designer, a UX researcher. She has built and managed UX teams and been the driving force behind UX process implementation across organizations. Inge is the founder of outriderUX and also its principal UX and conversational AI consultant. Over 30 years in the business, she's seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to UX strategy. And that's what we spoke about. Inge, thank you for joining us. Let's start by setting the stage. Why do we want to capture usability metrics? This takes time, investment, and effort. So what's the benefit, and why do we go to the trouble in the first place?
It does indeed. It takes time, investment, and effort. Absolutely. Why do we want to measure it? Because we want to understand our progress, right? We start with a certain baseline, obviously after having identified what the metrics are that we want to actually keep track of. Very important part. And once we have that, we set a baseline. Where are we at right now? And we understand the goal. Where do we want to go? And so the way to gauge that is by doing something that is metrics or data driven. The other advantage of doing that is that hopefully there is improvement, right? You are working towards your goal. Now there's a very clear way to communicate progress, to communicate, let's call it success. And so if you are part of a team that is working towards improving that user experience and you need more budget, you need a tool, you need whatever you may need, now you really do have some hard facts to go to an executive team and a manager and saying, look, this is what we've done so far. This is good stuff. Give us some more.
And we live in a data-driven world now, right? More than ever, data drives business decisions, hiring decisions, even personal decisions, right? So with that in mind, explain to us the importance of not only measuring usability in a comprehensive way, but also in a comprehensible way that everybody in the business can understand.
Yeah, that is a big challenge. I think it's a challenge with data, anyways. So data, you got numbers, and then really right away, it's like, well, okay, I've got numbers. What do they mean? What does this really represent? The key there is to be able to provide the right nuances behind the numbers and to also look at the numbers in the right way. I actually worked with a client earlier this year, and they were very interested in a metrics driven approach to their product development. And so we set up quite a comprehensive strategy for that. And it was great. But then as we started measuring early on in product development, we got these super high numbers. Like, oh yes, 90%, 100%. We're there. Clearly, of course, we were not there. We're still very early in development. And so what happened was, say there was somebody who was working against a script, right? Doing QA against a script. Sure, they got 100%. Well, they did better. That was exactly what was laid out, right? That is very different from measuring a user out in the wild using the product. And at the end of the day, those targets that we want to get to are for the user experience out in the wild. So it does really need to be nuanced. It needs to be explained. The first thing I said is that, look, we cannot go to the executive management with these numbers. It's misrepresenting things, right? And so it needs to be comprehensible. It needs to be meaningful across the board. And more often than not, you actually need some qualitative information, some user feedback or some additional background information in order to be able to understand what those numbers truly mean.
Right. And you work with clients all over the world, right?
Yep.
Right. So you must see this somewhat often, right? Well-intentioned efforts around usability and UX, but they miss the mark. Any other examples come to mind of how you see that in the real world?
Yeah, so as I was alluding to just earlier, it's not only about the measuring, it's also about what you measure.
Mhm.
And that where very often is where it kind of goes wrong in the first place. And that really is something that it does require thought. I mean, I've run workshops with clients where we were going to have a workshop, we were going to talk about what metrics, the metrics strategy, what metrics to focus on, and how to collect these, and etc. And I give them the homework of thinking about their company's KPIs, because at the end of the day, when you think about what do I want to measure, a part of it is the user, and definitely part of it is the business as well. And then there's technology and a number of different aspects as well. But if we just think about the user and the business, that is where I'm like, all right, come to us with your KPIs. What is your business focused on? What does success mean for this product, for your business? And it is amazing to me how that is very difficult for teams, especially in larger corporations. It's very difficult for teams to come to the table with that, to really start building out a meaningful set of metrics. And again, that sort of, well, that's step zero, honestly, right? If you don't get that right. And it's really interesting because just this morning I was on LinkedIn and I saw a thread. It was about metrics and gathering metrics, and the comments were all about how the metrics are measuring the wrong things more often than not, and are not understandable. And so this does seem to be a very systemic problem throughout the industry.
Now, is part of this not having the right voices in the room when you're deciding what to measure in the first place? Who should be in the room to help define those metrics that the business will ultimately measure and make business decisions against?
Yeah, absolutely. You need a lot of different people in the room because you need all those different voices to be heard, the user's voice, the business voice, and at times the metrics and sort of the decisions on what is success will have to include a compromise between some of those voices. When you think about sort of IVR systems, for instance, you've got the user experience that's important, but then you also have the containment rates and sort of those business constraints that are important as well, right? So you do need to come to sort of a comprehensive overview, and to do that, you really do want all the different stakeholders across the board, including the engineers, including the product managers, UX, business, everybody in the room from the start.
And do you find yourself being the negotiator between two sides a lot? Is it very conflict driven? Are you put in that position a lot?
There's definitely an aspect of that. Now, depending on the organizations, that may be easier or more difficult to navigate. But yeah, absolutely. At the least, making sure that there's an awareness sort of across the room, right? The mutual awareness of the importance of all of these different aspects, because everybody sort of tends to think sort of from their own silo. They're all quite focused on their objectives, but at the end of the day, and this is kind of where it comes down to the customer experience, right? Something that really has to be driven across the board, across the different parts of the organization.
Ideally, what perspectives do you like to have in the room to help give input toward this problem? Is there anybody that's commonly left out or anything like that?
I think the UX team is probably commonly left out, or at least that's a voice I hear a lot. Um, Yeah, so I think it's pretty common for the product team and the business side to come together and understand that this is an effort that needs to happen. And I think it's sort of the other, to some extent, maybe more auxiliary in a way, teams that are left out, or people just don't think about it, right? That really, I think, largely can be the case. It's just people just don't think about the fact that more different people really should be involved from the start. That's the other part of it, right? I mean, we're really talking about defining these metrics very early on. So who's involved at that point in time? It is very often largely the product teams, the business side.
Right. And bias is going to come into play. Institutional thinking is going to come into play, right? So, what are some ways that we can reduce or eliminate those issues?
Communication, as difficult as sometimes it is, and I know that these things take time. There Some of the efforts that I've suggested and teams have sort of adopted is a committee of sorts, so a sort of a cross-functional committee to come together. I mean, pros and cons there as well, because everybody's already very overburdened. They don't need another meeting
Right.
for something that may not be directly in their daily line of sight. So there's that, of course. And then I think just in general, HR, for instance, can play a role in fostering across the board, so communication, inclusion, right? Inclusion in the customer experience. Again, that's sort of what it all comes down to at the end of the day. And also you have to have executive buy-in, a strong executive voice. That definitely is very helpful as well.
Now, how soon in the life cycle can you begin to gather this kind of feedback? And are businesses missing an opportunity by not shifting usability testing left in the life cycle?
So usability testing should absolutely be as left as possible in the life cycle. I mean, as soon as you have a prototype, start usability testing. Now, in terms of gathering the data, so it's a good practice to start gathering the data, but it is, as I mentioned earlier with the example of my client, that data does need to be taken with a grain of salt in terms of the bigger picture, but at least it gives you an opportunity to, again, get those best practices in there and maybe refine your metrics as well. uh, just because you have to sort of put these metrics together at the very beginning so that you can use them throughout, it's sort of a big task, because you'd like to refine it a little bit, and so it kind of gives you a little bit of an opportunity to refine as you go early on, not quite high stakes. You won't have to go up on stage and say, oh yeah, well, we don't have data for that particular time there because we were still fiddling with it, right? So
Right.
so that's sort of I guess an advantage, and a disadvantage there.
You spoke with before about getting executive buy-in, and I'm sure that one of the big obstacles to process change is just that internal resistance and that kind of inertia that you have to work through. How do you go about handling that and getting people on board with the program?
Again, sort of a lot of communication, evangelizing, raising awareness, whether that's through campaigns, brown bags, just in any and every way possible. It very much depends on the type of organization, on sort of the way the organization uh, works, what are they most receptive to. I mean, are they, or actually a lot of teams these days are very distributed. Even what are their tools, what are they using as tools, what do they already have in place in terms of monthly meetings, knowledge sharing, things like that. And then just really kind of gauging what people are open to. You've got some teams that are actually very open to just learning new things and embracing, that have some sense of innovation, I guess, within the company. So you kind of look at what the company values are and what's sort of already underway, and then you kind of pick and choose a little bit and kind of tack onto that. That's for sure the best way to gain traction. If you're sort of starting something completely from scratch, it just takes a longer time, and there's a lot more risk of things just dying. you know you kind of
Right.
start something up and then poof, and it's done, and maybe it did some good, right? But maybe not so. Yeah.
So really aligning it behind shared business goals is super important there, right?
Yeah, shared business goals, just understanding what the employee experience, what the business focuses on in that. Yeah, all of those.
Great. Now, it's one thing to put together a logical strategy, and it's another to execute it at scale. So, what kinds of challenges do organizations face with scaling usability data collection and analysis as they launch in new markets and add to their products?
Yeah, so new markets are definitely, if we're thinking globally, a really interesting um, topic. Specifically also because if you're gathering usability metrics, so you're really gathering user feedback in a data driven way. What we've seen time and time again is that uh, users will rate things differently in different cultures, whether it's because they're more positively inclined, more negatively inclined, they're too polite, right?
Not
So
over here, right? Not in our country.
the British can be very polite.
Sure.
Some European countries will be a little more straightforward, it's really fascinating because I've seen, especially in studies where you have the quantitative aspect, so you've got the data, and you also have the qualitative user feedback, and you run that on the same products in different countries. If you have a little bit of a sample size, you really have a nice little project there in terms of really looking at truly what it means, and that is what we see, over and over again. So that's again sort of the, metrics are not, I mean, they're not the end all be all. In a sense, they're just one tool, right? They're one tool that needs to be handled carefully, but if handled correctly can be very helpful. And yeah, looking at, for instance, the global uh, audience is very interesting. And then things like if you've previously looked at your entire product and now you're looking at just one new feature, well, that's different, right? So again, sort of keeping all of that in mind. And then I do run into clients who say, well, what's the point then at the end of the day, right? What am I truly going to learn from this? And that again is where I sort of come down and say, okay, I understand. This is not magic. Nothing is magic, right? So just use it wisely, and that's sort of the goal there, really.
So you have to fight that nihilistic perspective on top of everything else. Well, then why try in the first place?
Yeah, yeah, and that's okay, right? I mean, I think it only helps to be able to explain how or where the value lies. So that's all right. I don't mind those conversations.
Sure. Now, if you're consistently failing to see ROI on your usability or UX efforts, is it time to take out the wrecking ball? How should organizations rebuild their approach from the ground up?
Yeah, if there's consistent issues, and then there are issues, no doubt. Um, my suggestion would be to perform an assessment across the board, to really understand where the challenges lie. And it can be anything of very many things. I mean, it could be a lack of bandwidth, for just people don't have enough time to do X, Y, or Z. It could be that the metrics are the wrongs. I mean, there are so many things, factors, and it's probably a combination of a number of factors. So, even if the answer is to rebuild, which I think it's generally more fixing than completely rebuilding, but even so, you'd want to know where exactly the challenges were so that you can avoid those in the future, right? So an assessment, an independent assessment, from literally an outside vendor, an outside set of eyes, that is definitely a good first step. Yeah,
So that you don't fail all over again.
that's right.
Right. Okay, Inga, moving on to our final sprint questions here, our lightning round. In one sentence, what does digital quality mean to you?
So to me, it means that a digital product works, meaning as a user, I don't encounter any bugs. Um, it is easy to use, so usability is there,
Mhm.
and it is appealing to use. So something that people will feel that they like using it. If maybe that's a little bit of a bonus, but if if we can get there, then I would say that that's sort of, to me, digital quality. And I know there's other aspects, obviously performance, things like that, that will have an impact on my user experience, right? So
What will digital experiences look like 5 years from now?
yeah, that's always a great question, isn't it? So on the one hand, it's David, it is going to look completely different. It is, I mean, it is going to be nothing like what we do today. We are going to be talking to everything. We are going to, I mean, AI is going to be everywhere, right? No, it's not. I mean, that's sort of, because the other side is that I think 5 years from now, in many ways, very little will have changed. We will still be using the websites we use today to check our email, to, I don't know, to submit a claim.
So a little bit in the middle there somewhere.
I think so. I think you'll continue to see sort of the mainstream of what we already have. I think submitting a claim will only become easier, right? Little bits, because by now we're quite mature on some of, sort of that side of the house, so to speak. And when it comes to innovation, when it comes to AI, I think we'll continue to see a lot of sort of different experiments, I kind of call them, to some extent, or trying to do things a certain novel way. Some of them will land, some of them will not. So, at the end of the day, where do we end up there 5 years from now? Probably some progress, but no, the world's not going to have completely changed.
Not exactly flying cars and things like that.
I know it's exactly what I was thinking about when I was saying this. Yeah, no, not yet. Still not yet.
We'll keep an eye out. You never know. Something that you are hopeful for.
I would like to, I think I call it discipline. And I'm now specifically going to be talking about conversational AI and sort of that industry, because it is a little bit more, a little bit newer, a little bit more nascent, less mature. And so what we see when we think about digital products in general is, I mean, we have the frameworks, we have the processes to do the software development lifecycle right. We've been doing this, whether it doesn't really matter what type of product it is, it largely, it can be applied, right? So we know how to do these things. We know what the right way to do things is. I think we lack discipline. And I see that then especially in something like conversational AI, where it's still sort of very innovative. But at the end of the day, if we want to develop those products in a way that they are successful, they're great products to use, we're just going to have to be a little bit more disciplined and truly go through the right processes, apply the frameworks and just do it right, rather than doing something kind of haphazard, not quite right, and then go like, yeah, those things don't really work, do they?
Inge De Bleecker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
That was our conversation with Inge De Bleecker, co-founder of outriderUX. Really interesting stuff. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Thanks as well to our producers, Joe Stella and Sam Susala, and graphic designer Carly Searles. If you'd like to reach out, please contact us at podcasts@applause.com. That's plural, podcasts@applause.com. We'll catch you next time.